welcome to our monthly talk. We every third Thursday of the month, we at Sovereign Nature Initiative host conversations with leading lights, amazing figures in the world of ecology via the lens of art, um, technology, theory, and it's a really amazingly wide-ranging group of thinkers and makers that we are able to talk with. And my name is Seth Boakley. I am Director of Creative Engagement at Sovereign Nature Initiative, and it's my pleasure to host these talks. And it's my great pleasure this month to be chatting with Memo Some. I'll turn it over to her in just a few minutes here to give a little presentation. But again, these talks range widely and are on our YouTube channel where you can see previous talks as well. Again, our organization deals with ecology through these three lenses of emerging technology, artwork, often digital artwork, and theory, and really looking at the cutting edge of all of those and where they connect. So this month, we are also getting ready for a partnership that many of you on this call, I think, know about already, but I'll mention the hackathon coming up in October in partnership with the Kenya Wildlife Trust. This is a really incredible chance for a digital community around the world to gather together, to innovate and work on solutions to problems faced by this extraordinary Kenya-based conservation organization, the Kenya Wildlife Trust, looking specifically at lion identification and conflict mitigation with predators. Applications for this hackathon are open until Wednesday of next week. That's the 21st, and hope that you'll spread the word about that. There still is time to apply to be part of that hackathon. I want to also shout out just in general to Kenya Wildlife Trust. We have some folks on the call, and the Mara Predator Conservation Program for hosting our dear Alessandro for the last couple of weeks, and really giving him an amazing welcome to Kenya and to the world of conservation and predator conservation that is going on there in an amazing way. Okay. Last thing, if you're not already in our mailing list for our newsletter, please do sign up. It's the best way to find out about talks like this that happen, about applications for hackathons, and all manner of other exciting activities happening at Sovereign Nature Initiative. So please do click on that link in the chat to sign up to receive updates from us with our newsletter. And also make liberal use of the chat just throughout our time. It's really a wonderful way to use this video conferencing technology to have a dynamic conversation. So I just encourage you throughout Some's presentation to use the chat, and then afterwards we'll open up the floor to what I hope will be a really active conversation. Okay, that's enough from me. I'm going to introduce our speaker this month. Memo Some is an environmental policy advocate, a wildlife storyteller focusing on including Indigenous communities in wildlife storytelling. Passionate about sustainability and wildlife, she founded the WildNow Foundation at the age of 18. And after discovering that the most significant part of the population in Kenya, the youth, have not been nurtured into conservation issues, she was inspired to take action. And so WildNow Foundation aims to bridge the gap between existing and future policymakers and grassroots conservationists to help better implement sustainable solutions for wildlife protection and better policies in the long term. She's an extremely inspiring person that I've had the pleasure of speaking with before, and I'm delighted to do so once again. So welcome, Some.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Seth. I do appreciate it. And thank you to the SNI team for organizing for this. Definitely excited to be your speaker for today. As mentioned, we're going to be talking about Indigenous communities in wildlife storytelling and the importance of inclusivity of just the Indigenous knowledge in wildlife conservation, right? And I just have one request. I want to make this as participatory as possible. So at the end of this, I don't want just questions. I would also want to hear your experiences with Indigenous communities. I'm going to share a little bit, being the storyteller, there are going to be a couple of stories that I'm going to share. to make it just as exciting as storytelling normally is, but I also want to hear your experience with the communities themselves, right? So have somewhere you can just write down the questions, or as I'm speaking and you have a story, please keep it in mind and we'll review it at the end of the presentation, right? So if you can just start.
Sounds great.
Great. Just give me a second. Yeah, so I do believe there is power with the Indigenous knowledge and in the Indigenous communities, especially in our day-to-day life, simply because I think the discussion of climate change is forever growing, and you wonder, are we ever going to be able to combat climate change or the mass extinction on wildlife? And the big question that I always have in mind is, how were the communities able to prevent what is currently happening in our day-to-day life if we are exposed to the knowledge and information and technology that we have at hand? And when I was reflecting on this, one of the answers that I got is they've definitely been coexisting with the wildlife and nature for years. And what we do have right now as environmentalists and scientists is more so of theoretical knowledge, and they have the practical knowledge. And one of the things that I'm going to emphasize in the presentation is emphasis on learning from the communities rather than educating the communities. Today we celebrate WildNow's anniversary. You just turned 3 years today, so big up to us as well. And as I think back, one of the mistakes that we've done in WildNow that I want young people to learn from is we had a pillar. We had different pillars that we were focusing on, and one of them was on educating the communities, until I got there and realized a lot of the education is to us. So we were exchanging knowledge, and that is one thing that I want to emphasize, that as much as we have this theory knowledge that we have been privileged to have with the exposure to information, there is knowledge that these Indigenous communities carry for generations, right? So learning from the community, from Indigenous knowledge, can actually improve and understand, create an understanding of local conditions, and provide a productive context of activities designed to help the communities. And thereby, by of course working with the Indigenous communities, you'll be able to create ventures that empower the communities themselves. And I'll just touch on that a little bit as we continue with the presentation. But one of the things that I have come to realize is, and I recently had this conversation with a community leader from Laikipia County. And we were talking about the migration. Right now, of course, it's a migration season. You realize that, of course, the wild beasts are moving from Serengeti to the Mara. And he touched on something that I never knew. He said that elephants, as you can see here, it's an interesting fact, that elephants immunize their calf just like human beings do. And of course, we do understand the magnitude of intelligence that the elephant has, but that really caught me off guard a little bit. And this came in as we were discussing the migration of elephants from the northern part of Kenya to now my hometown area is called Marmanet. So we have Marmanet Forest, which is in Laikipia County. And he mentioned that through observation from the communities, a lot of the elephants come and conceive in Marmanet Forest. This is the same forest that I had mentioned to Seth and Ali, and Catherine was also there, about some woman who's been taking care of the forest. She's called Mamanjeri. And the reason she's been taking care of this forest, not just because of it being a forest, but it's also where the elephants come and conceive. And I am sure you're asking yourself, then how are they able to immunize their calf? Well, the herbs and also a lot of the plant species in Marmanet Forest is used by the mothers for now the calves and also themselves for nutrients after conceiving, just like human beings. So what was intriguing about this was elephants do have a plan that at a particular time I need certain nutrients. And where do I get these nutrients? In Marmanet Forest. So I need to migrate all the way from northern Kenya to Marmanet Forest to conceive. And this came in as you were just sharing stories on different wildlife species. And of course, you also know about the elephant and the bee, and that brought forth now to save the elephants, the bee fencing to keep away elephants from the community and human wildlife conflict, etc. But whole point of this was when you ingrain yourself in the community, you get to learn so much about the wildlife that it makes our work easier. When I think about the time we work creating the fencing structures for keeping away elephants in Lake Kipia, we use a lot of money. And before we discovered the concept of the elephant and the bee, or just focusing on beekeeping. So ingraining yourself with the communities, you get to understand knowledge that makes our life easier as conservationists, but also it's more reliable and conducive with the ecosystem. So of course, there's now an increase in bee population, etc. But all this is centered around what's happening, storytelling. And storytelling is an integral part on everything that you do, from business, with your marketing, communication, branding. What is the story behind SNI? What is the story behind WildNow Foundation? Or what is the story behind yourself in what you do? And even just, in our experiences and creating that room of trust and sharing our different life experiences, it's a matter of storytelling. Storytelling is at the center of every single thing that we do in our day-to-day. And I think it's one of the elements that organizations need to invest fully in. What is the story behind what you do, right? So that's a big question that I would want you to answer at the end of this presentation as well. And being the storyteller that I am, I'm just going to show you a little bit of the impact of stories that have in our inspiring our emotions, especially. So this was a video that was taken recently in June 2022. Just have a look at it and then we'll just analyze it a little bit later.
What just happened? What? You got crazy, man. Okay.
So the video, it was a very controversial video the beginning of the year. And the reason that is so is because it brought the debate of human rights versus animal rights, right? In the video, it's very clear that the community member is devastated by the fact that the lioness had attacked one of his cattle. And of course, being a Maasai, very interesting people, they just came with a spear chasing it away. And the tourists, in their point of view, that was against animal rights. And it caused a lot of conflict in regards to how we human beings treat animals, especially, of course, also now the wildlife from that video. But it really got me thinking. It got me thinking of why would the tourist perceive this as a very evil attack on the animal rather than seeing it as also this human being who's just trying to protect his livelihood, right? And when I was thinking about that, one of the things that crossed my mind was it's because of the content that they have been exposed to. It's because of the films that they have watched in regards to wildlife stories and films that we have out there. And myself, one of the big questions, I don't know if you guys have had this, but a lot of the questions that I've had growing up being a conservationist is, oh, if you find an animal drowning or a human being, which one would you save, right? And when I think about why people ask that question, is because we have focused so much on creating an empathy with the animals rather than also focusing on a balance of empathy also with the human beings. And the importance of storytelling that we need to shift towards is creating a balance whereby human beings understand that I don't know if I can hear myself. I don't know, someone
No,
can
I think it was just someone that was unmuted for a moment. We're hearing you loud and clear. Thank you.
So I think we are at a point where we need to tell the full story, whereby human beings can't thrive without the wildlife and wildlife can't thrive without the human beings as well. And in conservation, even with the films that have been done, especially here in Kenya, it's more so one-sided, where it shows the beauty of nature and wildlife, but forget to show these communities that have taken their time to create such an ecosystem, right? So when I think about it, there's a lot of impact in inspiring, especially emotions from films and storytelling, that I think we now need to shift that and also involve the local communities and their impact in conservation. And because of that, just a little bit of the consequence of the exclusion of the local communities. As I've mentioned, of course, there's now the conflict between animal rights versus human rights, which is not supposed to be there. And there's that lack of understanding of communities on the impact in conservation. And of course, the most important I always think about right now is the loss of reliable knowledge and practices in conservation from the community's culture and traditions. Because of their exclusion, we have neglected a lot of the information that they've had and passed down for generations. And what this has done is we focused more so on, of course, the modern science, which clearly hasn't been very effective. Otherwise, we would not be talking about climate change in our day to day. And as time goes on, more and more knowledge is lost. So one of the ways to combat that is to now include the communities, to not just tell their stories, but let them tell their own stories to make it as original as possible. And the impact, when you just do like an impact analysis of the impact of the exclusion, one of the things is socially is we have this distorted perception on and opinions on wildlife conservation in Africa. And I've put in brackets, if you can read it, it says kazi ya mzungu. And I intentionally did that because what that means in English is this is a foreigner's job. And in an African perspective, and also more so here in Kenya, any person who is doing conservation work, you are in the wrong field, because that is not a job for an African, that is a job for a foreigner. And the reason why we think that way is because, again, we don't have a lot of local communities being involved in conservation. Therefore, they've neglected something that has been part of their cultures and tradition for generations. So a lot of the youth in our generation currently, I don't see conservation as even a career, right? So as I've mentioned, hiyo ni kazi ya mzungu, so it's perceived as a foreigner's job. And then in ecological perspective, of course, wildlife faces extinction and climate change is of course on the rise. And whenever I think about this, I always think of the quote, I think it's an African proverb, it says, the young people go faster, but the older generation know the way, something of the sort. So with that, we might, as young people, we might be exposed to a lot of technology that might be effective in conservation. But as said, sometimes there's nothing new under the sun, and we need that draw knowledge from the community elders to just guide us on how to approach even the technologies that we have, right? So it's a collaboration between the elders and now the younger people in this generation. And of course, if you look at the economy, it's very interesting that a lot of the communities that are centered around wildlife areas here in Kenya are one of the most affected with poverty. And why? Because we have also not included them in decision-making on conservancy issues, etc. So communities are coming to not appreciate a lot when it comes to conservation, as they've not experienced the benefits of also conservation itself. So I think we need to flip that, whereby they're included in decision-making processes on wildlife conservation and being exposed to a lot of the benefits that there is in the conservation sector. So what are the solutions for this? One is, as I had mentioned in the beginning, if you have an organization or any projects on conservation, I just want you to scratch off educating communities. Go learn from the communities and exchange knowledge. There's so much that you can get from them, and there's so much that they can get from you. And there's a lot of power in that collaboration. But I think we need to relinquish this perspective that, because we have, textbook knowledge, we are the ones to say on the way forward of the different ecosystems. I remember a particular time in WildNow, we had a project in Kisumu, in Lake Victoria. And one of the programs that we were having, I myself, I had never been to Lake Victoria. And one of the programs that we were having was educating the communities. And when we got there, there was a lot of lack of, the communities were not open to collaborating simply because they knew that, a lot of the NGOs come with this knowledge of educating them and not hearing from them. So there was that reluctance in collaboration. So sometimes the communities do know what you do need, but because of the hesitance of collaboration, it becomes a hitch. And therefore, it's an emphasis that I have been having with a lot of young people who are coming up in the conservation sector. There's power in also learning. And of course, number 2 is exploiting the tech and storytelling in conservation. And that's, I think, one of the things that I love about SNI. They are focusing on a very big gap in the conservation sector technology. Young people really need to invest in filling that gap with how we can include more of tech in different sectors, maybe from human-wildlife conflict to understanding more, the indigenous knowledge. There is a lot that we need to do with tech. So if you are trying to discover how to give back to conservation, one of the areas that I definitely recommend is exploitation of now tech. And of course, number 3 is invest in local community sustainable ventures. This comes in when I thought of the fact that wherever you go, leave a footprint, right? So for WildNow, we are currently focusing on storytelling with Rudy Initiative. And with every story that we get from the Mara, from Laikipia, we hope to not only bring light to what the community is doing, but also start ventures that are very much related to the community's cultures and practices. So for example, with the beekeeping in Laikipia due to human-wildlife conflicts, or of course, now the so-called, or the so very popular Ushanga in Masai Mara, which basically is for women who create, of course, the beadwork. And I think that really empowers a lot of the women and the women in the communities from the Masai Mara. And that one specifically will be working with Nashulai Conservancy, which I can touch a little bit more later on. But everywhere you go, just inspire the community, but also give them a sense of benefit in the conservation sector, and very much related to their cultures and their practices. Yeah, as I've mentioned with Rudy Initiative, what we are doing now in relation to this is we are telling stories, we are empowering and transforming the community livelihoods in different ways, but most so we want the communities to just own their stories, and in everything that we do, we are very much focused on bringing a lot of the ventures, the startups that have been started in the communities to a global scale. So I think that's one thing that a lot of organizations have neglected, whereby we just focus on getting the stories and then you're done. No. I think there's more power in always the communities knowing that, Sovereign Nature has done this and this and this for the community, and creating a sustainable concept that the community doesn't have to not only depend on Rudy, but they can sustain themselves. I think there's power in that. And one of the things that I believe in, that I would really want to emphasize, especially in the coming hackathon as also a panelist and with young people, is the creating now that culture of innovation with indigenous knowledge, right? I think, as I've mentioned, what we are trying to do is bridge the gap between science and indigenous knowledge. And for that to happen, a lot of also innovation has to be put in place. And one of the things that I have learned with the 3 years of running WildNow is to invest in future thinking. What is the idea that I have in mind right now? What is it going to be in the next 2 years? What is it going to be in the next 5 years? And from that, I think a lot of the concepts that we develop are going to be more long-term. And that's the whole point of, I guess, now with future thinking, being able to develop concepts that sustain years and years to come. So with future thinking, include also the stakeholders that are being involved. What is the impact that my idea has with the youth, the wildlife, the local communities, etc. So I think if nothing from this presentation, I just want you to take to these two key takeaways. One is to create a culture of innovation with Indigenous communities, and number two is to invest in future thinking. So I think that was the last part of my presentation. Made it very short intentionally to just hear your questions and also get your stories.
A round of applause for our wonderful guest. I'm sorry that applause on Zoom is so quiet, but I think you can feel and see maybe in some of the smiling faces and the clap emojis. We really appreciate that beautiful presentation. You've given us a lot to think about already, and I welcome absolutely the opportunity to open up this to the group that is assembled on this call. And to reflect back on your presentation and your really laying out some of the challenges and principles of what you're working on with WildNow, and definitely with this storytelling initiative, and Rudy in really eloquent ways. So I'd love to open it up to the group, and maybe folks can bring questions to Some. And I also noticed that in the chat, Catherine asked a question about where can youth learn about opportunities for working in conservation, especially for those living in urban environments. And then, Ale mentioned in response the wildlife clubs at KWT, and I think Felix is on the call too. So I don't know if you want to open that up, but it would be nice to hear a little bit about the wildlife clubs, and also to hear some of your thoughts about engaging with kids from urban environments and how to get them involved.
I'm trying to go through the questions. What was the first question?
It's like where can youth learn about how to work in conservation, and those living in urban environments, maybe thinking about Nairobi potentially, or other cities around the world?
I think the beauty of conservation and where we are right now is with organizations such as also WildNow Foundation and WWF, we have been able to create programs where young people get exposed to the not only because there's this stereotype that conservation is more so of focused on funds rather than creating a concept that is of course beneficial for and profit generating for the communities and also for the founders themselves. And from that, I think a lot of these programs from the WWF and also from the WildNow Foundation is we have more so centered our focus on making sure that young people understand all concepts of conservation and how they can create ideas that are not only going to benefit the wildlife, that is centered on now maybe their mission, maybe it's on plastic pollution. Currently, we are working with an organization that is centered more so on plastic pollution, but it's not just creating or rather waste management, but it's also how you're going to generate profit from this. So I think right now there is a lot of exposure on that. There are a lot of organizations that are coming up, but the stereotype on what conservation really is and how to benefit from conservation is still a major issue in Africa and most of also here in Kenya. So what I always say is, thanks to universities like now African Leadership University, and I think Felix is here, he can also chip in on that, is we are centered on different global challenges. And it's amazing to be in a class with young people who want to study wildlife conservation in Africa and change that mindset. So I think that is a very, very big step if a university is able to take in young leaders to study conservation, and to have now programs from these organizations to empower young people to venture into the conservation sector. So we are moving at the right direction. I don't know if that's the second question.
Yeah, that's great. And we have some links in the chat to the Mara Predator Conservation Education Outreach. This is an initiative of Kenya Wildlife Trust, and so we're seeing that there's multiple organizations here, even in this little conversation, this microcosm, that are engaged with this question of education and how to bring people in who are young and who can then spread that message and maybe take upon themselves the lifelong kind of mission of remaining in connection with the ecosystems around them. Um, I, I also would, very much welcome. I would welcome anybody and all actually to come on video too. If you guys want to just show your faces and be part of the conversation, I really welcome that. And you're also welcome to listen in. And certainly Felix or anybody else who's involved with this work on the ground are very welcome to join the conversation. I wanted to also ask you if I can just pick up on something from the chat, Some. I guess a little bit about media, because there's such a lovely high-tech, low-tech thing going on in your presentation, talking about these really on-the-ground technologies, even thinking about bees and elephants and the management of bees as a technology to actually engage with elephants, for example. That's not necessarily always the way that we think about tech, but in a certain way, we could think of that as a kind of a form of technology. But I also think like this question of media is really interesting. Where I live in Minnesota in the United States, we have a lot of indigenous knowledge in the region near the city where I live, and we often have like storytelling sessions where folks will come in and come to classrooms or come to parks and lead, let's say, indigenous knowledge tours of a park and say, okay, this is a plant that is often gathered by my tribe or by my people. And I think it's a really incredible way for people of all ages to be connected, but it's also very, very in person. It's often like literally people coming to a classroom or maybe students going to a place to learn about plants and animals. And I guess my question to you would be, what do you think the role is for digital media, film, YouTube, like all of these technologies? What is the most effective way, I guess, to amplify these stories in your view?
That's a really, really good question, Seth. When I was thinking about the approach that Rudy is going to take with what the outlet that we'll be having with our stories, one of the things that came in mind was for the communities to own their stories. And when I got the invite to be a panelist for the upcoming now hackathon, I remember one of the big questions that we had when Web 2 was introduced, and I had this conversation with Lumona yesterday, was what is the internet, and what is exactly Web 2? And as I think about it right now, that is the same thing that we are going through right now. That we are also asking the same thing: what is Web 3? And the fact that we are still trying to conceptualize how to use such a platform makes me think that the best way for us to use as like a media outlet for our stories, especially with communities, is to venture on something that is as futuristic as the Web3. Of course, there is privilege on sticking to outlets like now the YouTube, etc. But I tend to think there's power in thinking way ahead. So it's something that we haven't done. It's something that I haven't seen being, it's not common yet in our ecosystem, but I think I will definitely recommend being the future, that is something that we should focus on. But other than that, when we were discussing the same with my team, one of the things that we battled was creating a balance between other people in the urban areas and the people in the rural areas to have the exposure of the films that we're creating. And at that time that we realized, the people in the rural areas don't have maybe probably access to internet to even subscribe to a lot of the content that you're creating, or a lot of them don't even have a television to watch whatever you create, the stories that you've created from their own communities. So that was a little bit unfair. So what we did was we have created just stories that can be uploaded on social media and are going to be featured in different TV stations. But at the same time, we're going to be doing a lot of screening. So if you know, not Save the Elephant, Elephant Queen, they do a lot of screenings with schools to just feature the movie itself while educating the students about, the elephants the elephants and also the Elephant Queen, the movie itself. So sadly, that's where we are in Kenya. A lot of the communities still don't have access to internet or electricity. So you have to improvise and take the screening to the communities, and they do enjoy it actually, and it's amazing. I remember when you did that in Savo, it was quite the experience. So right now it's just creating a balance of both, but I'll definitely advise for anyone who is in the storytelling sector to, myself, I haven't conceptualized fully on Web3, but I would really want us to tap more into it in the next few years. So those are just my 2 thoughts as of now. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I also wanted to bring in, and feel free anyone to jump in here actually in the chat, or just even unmute yourself. Be brave, ask a question, get in the mix. I'm curious about the role of emotion and affect. Sometimes I think about viral videos, like they're funny often, or they're kind of maybe political, or they poke at some issue. But often they're quite disposable. Like we get a short video and we watch it on our phone or something, and maybe then it just goes away. And I wonder about the role of emotion and affect. When you and I were first talking, Some, we talked about The Lion King. We talked about other like kind of big stories, like epic stories with emotion. And I come from a storytelling background myself as a screenwriter and a theater maker. I love telling stories with really deep, emotional impact. And I believe that that's important to move people to, even if you're trying to get them to give money to a conservation or get involved with the conservation or learn more about something, you have to kind of start, in my view, with emotion or that kind of connection, the heart connection maybe. And I'm curious, like how you see that in your role as a storyteller.
Yeah, I do believe, of course, in everything that you create with stories, you have to capture people's emotions. But my concern comes in when emotions are, for lack of a better word, it also tends to be very manipulative. In the sense that you use your emotions to manipulate people. Now in conservation, I do love watching documentaries. I think I'm one of those people who can watch the wildlife documentaries and I will even get bored. But I think from that, when you are exposed to such content, it's, as I had mentioned, it's very one-sided. So a lot of the times I say with wildlife documentaries, they use the communities, especially the Maasai, as props in their videos. So you just have a Maasai there, take a he's been captured well, focus now on the wildlife, etc. So a lot of people don't understand the importance of these communities on wildlife conservation. So we have created a lot of empathy on wildlife rather than the community. And I think that is very manipulative, because on the ground, that is not the case. On the ground, it's a coexistence of now the wildlife and the communities. And there are a lot of issues here and there with such coexistence, such as human-wildlife conflict, that has not been very well brought out from these stories. So it's very manipulative, but I think we have done a very good job with creating emotions for the animals, I have to say. But I think now it's about time to create that balance. Very important. Yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, I love what you said earlier about the screenings as well. It's so important, I think, with technology to make it accessible both for the makers of the technology and then the people receiving any product that's made from the technology. This like extractive mindset of like taking story and using it for another end is not including the storytellers in the process, and it's really important to consider, where and how a story is being heard.
Yeah, I just wanted to interject here, Seth, to say that, you gave me, Seth, a task, which is like, I guess the most exciting task since I joined SNI, which was about interviewing all these Maasai in the Masai Mara, and Felixi and Michael helped me out to set up those interviews. And one of the questions was, of course, about their story of an encounter with a lion, and they're very diverse. And you listen to them now. But one of the most, I think, the things that I've learned and really connects with what Somes was saying is that it felt to me that more than, I mean, the story changed at some point, and together with the synergy that existed before between the lion and the herder in the community, the stories changed with it. So the connection between reality and story is so tightly coupled, and I believe the story precedes the reality in some way. This was my experience. But then, I mean, I can bring up one of the stories that was shared as kind of like my favorite, because I still don't know if it was a real story or if it was more of a, an allegory, which I believe it was probably. But so there was a story from a Maasai who told me that when a Maasai, when he once got drunk, and it was in the middle of the night, and he had to kind of make his way to the village, he fell asleep in the middle of the bush, and he said that this is a common thing in Maasai do. But what happens then is that a lion, a male lion, will come and sit 4 meters away from the, well, he was sitting 4 meters away from him. This was the story he was telling me. And then will protect him from hyenas, because hyenas are the ones that are actually the dangerous animals that would kill humans and steal kids. So and then when when the sun comes up in the morning and you wake up, the lion will look at you, make sure that you're awake and fresh, and then it would just shake the mane and walk away. This was such a story that I'm still like trying to find what the hidden meaning of it is, but for sure it was about this the value of in difficult times, or in times where maybe there is a this is my interpretation, of course, a disease or something that the Maasai is struggling with, that that a lion is there to sort of protect the community and the village from that. And it can be the relationship that lion has with a gazelle, or with by killing diseases and so on. It can be anything, right? But there was something about the respect and the idea that there's no Maasai without a lion. And of course I had many stories, positive or negative, about the relationship with predators in general, but this was the most powerful one. And again, it might be true, I don't know, but he told it to me as if it was true, and I really, it was very powerful. And I think this is also the storytelling, the as if, so acting as if it's true. I think that's the power of stories, right?
Yeah, and stories spread, and they can spread without being on YouTube. They can go viral by being told person to person as well. And thanks for sharing that. And there's such a care that you take, I know, as a storyteller and a story gatherer as well, that there is always in any exchange of stories a kind of trust implicit that the stories will be cared for by the person who's bearing them out of the community. And that is really the question of the mediator. If it's a filmmaker coming to a community and capturing a story as an oral history in this way that you're doing, how are the stories tended to and cared for if they go beyond that circle? And that goes to this really great question in the chat, this hard question that we've been going around. Eric mentioned, you mentioned we need to exchange knowledge with the communities. If they can't access the internet, how do we go about that? And this is like to me a really big question about exchange and value, right? And we're not going to get to the bottom of it today, but I guess it'd be great to dig a little bit more into it, or hear what you think, Some, about that kind of question.
Yeah, let me just throw back a little bit to Ali's story. I think one of the when we decided to focus on Indigenous communities, one of the challenges that we had was all the stories from the communities were significant, but a lot of them were also not reliable, right? So it came to a point when I realized, of course, some of the stories are myths, and some of them are actually something that we need to test and use as scientific knowledge. And for that reason, I came with the cultures from the communities, one of the things that we need to realize is even with these mythical stories that they do have, it comes with a lot of life lessons. So probably for that one was to just demonstrate the importance of now the relationship between the Maasais and the lions. And there are some that when you do test it, like now Elephant and the Bee was tested and it's quite effective and is now a scientific knowledge, and that is reliable data. But all these serve a purpose in creating now the identity of these communities. And the most important thing here is to be able to, of course, and that's why I put emphasis in researching more about these communities and now be able to segment it in terms of this is what the communities believe in. So I shared with Ali when we had breakfast, we mentioned about the totems and how my totem is from an eagle. And I don't know if you guys have the same thing, the people who are on the call, but a lot of the things also from my totem might sound a bit mythical, but it just demonstrates how I have a very close relationship with the eagle. So, and it's part of my identity. So I think in appreciating Indigenous knowledge, we need to distinctly have, of course, the mythical and also the reliable data, but we can't exclude any, or especially the mythical. It's also very important and captivating in stories. And just to answer the question from Eric, which is, we need to exchange it. Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. One of the things that I say is if you're passionate about something, there is always power in collaboration. And by that, I mean, if you want to learn more about Indigenous communities, get in touch with also organizations which are working with Indigenous communities. So for example, my focus in the next few months is, of course, to learn more about the Maasai. I have been exposed to the communities around me, the Kalenjin, the Turkana, and the Samburis, but I know very little of the Maasai. The much that I know has probably from what also many people know about the Maasai, but we want to get deeper into that. So collaborate with communities that are already working with. Oh my, Felix, your totem is the same as Govans, an antelope, your family. But so I collaborate with communities that are already working with the Indigenous community that you want to work with. So if you want to learn about the Turkanas in Laikipia, WildNow has access to the Turkanas in Laikipia. Come, stay over for a few months, do your research, etc. If you want to learn about the Maasais, Felix is in the Mara, get in touch with Felix. So I think there's a lot of power in collaboration that we undermine in this element of we have no access to the internet, but I think we have no access, but we have a lot of access to people who are on the ground. So I think at the top of my head, I would emphasize on collaboration. Just have your objectives right and reach out in the little way that you can. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And Lumuna, I don't know if you want to ask a question. It's nice to see you. Feel free to jump in to the conversation. Oh yeah, and Alessandra mentioned in the chat this this totem question. You know, it's an example of again kind of a kind of indigenous knowledge or a knowledge about what questions to ask, which is a different form of knowledge, right? A knowledge about how to speak across a cultural difference, arriving somewhere new as an outsider. And you know what you just mentioned, Some, about the role of these kind of NGOs or organizations as mediators is so important. Oftentimes, I think those of us on the outside looking to gain from and learn from and just be with or around forms of indigenous knowledge so that we can learn and know different ways to be in the world in relationship to nature in particular. We don't always know where to go to get that knowledge. And so your role as a mediator is super important. And the care, obviously, with which you do that mediation is important. And it goes back to the question of storytelling, right? And, you know, how stories are translated, sometimes literally translated, right, from one language to another, and then sometimes culturally translated as well. And we have this very global culture now. To me, I wonder too, like when you showed that video earlier, it was so nice to hear you explain to me like why it was controversial. Because when I first saw it, I didn't know, I didn't understand why, and what the point of this, the particular point of conflict, what that might be. So in a way, so even some video, like some videos or some content, let's say some stories, they don't always, let's say, speak for themselves. Sometimes they require a context or like a framing in some ways to become clear if you don't come with cultural knowledge to begin with.
Mm, 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 mm. Yeah, definitely. I think when my brother actually sent me the clip and the article about the controversy from the video itself, and I guess it was very one-sided, as I had mentioned, whereby just the introduction part of the Maasai with the spear and him chasing out with it. But when I was thinking deeply about it, if the tourists, for example, had would ask the Maasai, like, why would you do that? Or, are willing to have a dialogue. I think this also brings the power of storytelling. If the community member was given the opportunity to just say, maybe this is my cattle, the lion is not supposed to do this, and that's why I had to chase it away, then it would have probably prevented all the controversy that we also had, even with Kenya Wildlife Services. I remember it caused a lot of chaos in the Mara, because it did happen in the Mara. But I think what we normally do as human beings, we run with the first thing that we saw. So we just saw a person with a spear. We don't care why he was doing that. He's just attacking an animal. And I think we always have to think through why the person did what he did, and create room for open-mindedness to understand where the person is coming from. I think that just creates a better human decency around us. Right. So yeah, I think that is how the media operates. The media just takes one thing and runs with it as it is. But we can do better than that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think your view, it seems to me, somewhere with your organization, with WildNow and the Rudy project, is enlarging. It's enlarging the table for more people to be at the table. It seems to me, you're saying in part, like, we don't always listen to. We think about conservation just about animals and not about the people who live with and alongside the animals. So those people are at the table, and in a way the animals are at the table, and in a way the conservationists are at the table, and maybe people supporting conservation from far away are at the table. And what is the table like? What is the conversation? And I think you're doing such a beautiful job of enlarging the table, enlarging the conversation, so that we can show up.
Yeah, on that note, on the conflict side, like the story I've heard last week was from several the Maasai I've interviewed, is that chasing the lion away, like the lion knows that when he's attacking the cow, it's not doing the right thing. But then if it's eating a gazelle and a human being goes close, it will not move, and it's actually true. So they kind of understand that the cow thing is something they shouldn't be doing. And so the Maasai has to remind them that this is not a good thing to do. And some of them said actually that when this sort of conflict was not allowed anymore, and that this and it became illegal, the lion started to become more tame and then started to kill more. But this is on the other hand, the story also of the lion attacking the Maasai of the village and so on is also for them. I've heard it a few times. They said that the lion is reminding also the Maasai in a reciprocal way that they're dangerous as well, and the Maasai should not, for instance, go into their territory, or they shouldn't overgraze with the cattle. So the story, in some way, then is again about reciprocity and about respect, mutual respect, right? So I really enjoyed that that storytelling, which made total sense in the scheme of like a coexistence, right? That you also mentioned.
I want to make some space for folks that are on the call to, put into the chat any links that you want to share about your work. And we'll put a couple more in there as well, maybe even ones we posted earlier, just to remind you of how to stay in touch with us. We don't need to wrap this up quickly, but I also want to make space for maybe one or two more questions if we have them, and also just a little space for people to put in the chat links that are coming out of this conversation, maybe conservation programs that are integrating Indigenous knowledge in interesting ways that you might know about, or other relevant links that we can follow up with. As I mentioned, this talk will be on our YouTube channel just even later today, and you can also share it with friends, and please do so. It's amazing to hear, Some, your perspective. You're just such a great spokesperson for the incredible work that you do. Any other questions that we have, or anything else that you want to kind of reflect, Some?
Yes, definitely. I think, yeah, once again, it is a pleasure being your speaker for today. You mentioned that you do this on a monthly, so I definitely am going to be up to date with your monthly talks now that I know that. But thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to have met also a couple of you guys. I can see that Felixi just mentioned that he's from the Antelope totem. That is quite interesting, and he works with Mara Predators. We are hoping to do also stories on that. So Felix, I'll definitely reach out to you, and I look forward to the hackathon. Catherine, I cannot wait for us to engage more, especially also on the panel. So yeah, we'll definitely share the word out there for more people to apply, but I definitely look forward. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much again. And again, follow the work of WildNow on social media. Look out for the Rudy project coming. Oh, we have, sorry, before we wrap up, Bradley has something. Please jump in there.
Yeah, hi. I'm Bradley. We applied for the hackathon, and we've had a few interactions. Like recently, we met with Ali and with the other partners like the Shamba Network people. So we did have conversations around human-wildlife conflict in the lion conservation aspect. So we've sat here, me and Stefan is my teammate in the hackathon and also co-founder in the company, BLCK. So we've sat here and I've had a lot, and seeing that the vision that Memo has it's really good, and what we're planning will really fit in with what we'll present at the hackathon. So there will be okay, now we've seen some things that a note for something noted was that the Maasai's can't seem not to have smartphones. So we do have, we've brainstormed like a solution on how to solve that. So I think more will be said during the hackathon. So yes.
Thanks for introducing yourself and mentioning that. Yeah, and I hope to see you there. And I also hope to make clear too how we as an organization, as a global organization, we're trying to gather digitally, right, in ways that are responsive to these hyper local questions about things happening on the ground, in this case in the Mara. And it's a huge challenge that we're taking on, but really exciting one, and it means that we're building a kind of community. I think a hackathon, in a traditional way, is like a competition to make the best software, and we have that vibe. We have that. We have rewards for the best technologies and the best solutions. So we have that kind of hacker software development philosophy embedded, but we also have a way that I think the hackathons themselves become a kind of gathering point for conversation, for artistic ideas, for knowledge exchange, and I really celebrate that. Especially this one, we have a little bit more time than we've had in the past, so I hope that it's going to be a place where there's cross-pollination between people from, in some cases, around the world, or maybe right next door, new connections. the technologies themselves that are built, we hope will, of course, win the competition or go on, but also we hope that the connections made between people foster, professional relationships and knowledge exchange that can just enrich our overall approach to, ecology and conservation.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to have all of you here. And again, one more time, thank you so much to Memo Some for joining us and that beautiful talk. Yeah, thanks everybody. We'll see you next month.